Barney, would you like to introduce Bill?
Now, we do have an unusual speaker, unusual that is a real hero, and due to the fact that it was Lee Leviton who did the searching on him and initiated the first contact with him, I'd like to have Lee introduce him personally to him. But let's give him a good round of applause, all right? God bless you.
Where'd everybody go? All right. Thank you all for being here this morning, and I would just like to give you a little background as to how I came about to get Bill Sanchez here as a speaker. To those of you who were at the premiere, the Unbroken premiere, you might recall that too bad that Angelina Jolie couldn't be there to introduce the guests, but the producer of the movie did. And after introducing us, he introduced an individual, or two, I should say, who were at the same prison camp with Louis Zamperini. Playing back the tape of what took place in my mind, what took place at the premiere, I remembered that. And, you know, I've been coming here, and thanks to the gentleman sitting there, Dennis McCarthy, for the past 3 or 3.5 years. And how that came about, my wife read an article in the newspaper, in the Daily News, that Dennis had written about Wings Over Wendy's, and she kept telling me, you ought to get with these people. You have a lot in common with them. I was working at the time, so I kept putting it off, but after a while I finally came down to a meeting, and I got to say I never looked back. I met the finest bunch of people that anybody could ever hope to meet, and that is our membership here at Wings Over Wendy's. But anyway, since I've been here, and I've gone to many, many, many meetings, not to take anything away from our raffle, I always believed, that the guest speaker really made the meeting. And since then, I've always been on the lookout for guest speakers. I've gotten several to come in and speak to us from newspaper articles, magazine articles, the 11 o'clock news on ABC. So there are about 8 or 10 speakers that I was able to get here to address us. And then remembering the introduction at the premiere of the gentleman who was at the prison camp with Louis Zamperini, and recalling that several weeks ago, I said, how did I miss him? This guy's going to be the greatest guest speaker if everything could come together. So I called my person at Universal who made it possible for all of us to attend the premiere, and I asked if she wouldn't find out who it was and where he lives, and would it be possible to get him here as a guest speaker. She came back to me very quickly and gave me the name of Bill Sanchez, his telephone number. I called him after telling Bill what this is all about. He said, I certainly, would be happy to be there. The thing that I was concerned about is that he'd be able to come here and speak well enough, because let's face it, when people start to get up and around our age, a couple of things leave. Second thing that goes, your memory. Don't ask me what the first is, because I don't remember. But anyway, when I got Bill on the phone, he was gangbusters. He just came on like, anybody, like a 21-year-old, strong, remembering everything, and I just had to pursue it. So thanks to these events and my persistence in trying to reach good speakers, we have Bill Sanchez here, who served in the same prison camp, or was in the same prison camp, as Louis Zamperini. So without further ado, Bill Sanchez.
Let's give him a good hand.
First and foremost, I want to say that I have the privilege of speaking to such a nice group as the veterans that are here
You make the
today.
day nicer.
And also to see so many young people that attended the meeting as well. Now, I became a prisoner of war when Corregidor surrendered. Many people are not aware that after Pearl Harbor was bombed, within 7 hours, the Japanese attacked all the military bases in the Philippines. And believe me, I thought they wanted to end the war the first day. They threw everything at us. Our first order of the day came from Washington, and it was that we should hold out at least for 3 months in order that we could establish the bases in Australia to get our offensive going. And just after that first day, I says, 3 months? How can we ever last that long? Nevertheless, Bataan lasted 4 months, and Corregidor lasted 5, which was more than sufficient time for them to establish the base of operations in Australia so that we could start our offensive in the South Pacific. Now, people should know that Corregidor was in combat for 5 straight months every day, and that's no picnic. All of you who have been in combat are certainly aware of that. Nevertheless, when we surrendered, it was the Japanese were ordered to take Corregidor at all costs. And on the evening of May the 5th, which was Cinco de Mayo, and I was supposed to be celebrating the Mexican holiday, I was down in charge of a machine gun protecting the North Dock, which the Japanese were attacking since they were coming from the north. The first attack, we were fortunate to repel. The second attack, we waited for because we knew it was forthcoming. About 2 in the morning, they laid a barrage of artillery, and they knocked out my position. I was in charge of the machine gun position, so I had to report to the operating officer that the position was knocked out and the North Dock was now exposed. The operating officer got some other Marines. They formed another machine gun position, and the officer said, "You're dismissed." I reported to my unit, which is a long name. Headquarters Battery, Harbor Defenses of Manila and Subic Bay. Now, that was the highest command in the Philippines. In fact, when they formed USAFI, General MacArthur took over. He came and he said, from now on, all orders will be followed as I give them. He made no bones about it, so we all became members of General MacArthur's staff. The surrender came on May the 6th, and of course, the Japanese took command and didn't treat us too nice. The night of the surrender, the when I reported to my commander, the General Bowler, who was the adjutant, he told me that General Wainwright was on his way to meet General Homa to surrender Corregidor, and that he had ordered the post flag to be lowered so that the Japanese would not capture it. And he said, the flag is going to be handed to you. It'll be up to you to see that it doesn't fall into the hands of the Japanese. I had no idea what I was to do to dispose it, because you can't burn it and you can't bury it. But when they gave me the flag, it was in such shreds that I decided I was going to shred it. As you all know, a post flag is the highest flag in the military. So while I was shredding it, a West Point officer came. He said, "Can I help you?" I said, "I need all the help I can get." So we got it, we finished it. I called Colonel Bowler, the adjutant. I told him, this is what we've done. He said, it's a good job, mission completed. And while I was gone to the adjutant, a fragment of the flag was taken by the West Point officer, and with Colonel Bunker, they took charge of it. Colonel Bunker put it under the patch of his insignia and carried that all through the capture. When Colonel Bunker felt that he wasn't going to make it, he gave a piece of the flag, fragment of the flag, to another West Point officer, and he told him, he said, make sure that this flag gets back to the United States. Colonel Bunker passed away. He did not make it. He was buried, and the fragment he had went with him. However, the West Point officer did make it, and when he came back, he handed it to the Defense Department, and that fragment is now at West Point Museum. And I was fortunate to be invited to West Point because of that flag. And my son David was with me, and they treated us royally, and they put us up at the campus hotel, which was within walking distance of the museum there. And we got a call from the protocol officer, and he said, 1000 tomorrow, be ready to leave. And someone's going to pick you up. At 1000, there was a second lieutenant who had already graduated, but because of surgery in his shoulder, he was waiting for an assignment. So he served as our escort. When we got to the museum, the director, the media, and everybody was there. And of course, they interviewed me. But when we went to the conference room, they brought out the fragment of the flag. And it was quite emotional for me just to hold it and to think of that night when everything happened. And fortunately, I was able to hold back my tears, and they gave us a tour of West Point all throughout the whole academy thing. And the protocol officer was having lunch with us, and we enjoyed exchanging banners. And he said, besides being the protocol officer, I am also a teacher. And he says, I know you have been in combat. What should I tell these young officers when they first go into combat? And I told him, that's easy. help, they have to use their intuition, assess the problem, and make a decision. And no matter what decision he makes, he has to stand by it, because if not, the people under him will pick it up and they will know that they don't have the security that they need. However, I told him, if things get pretty bad, the only thing you can do is go to the buck sergeant. He's the one that the underlings pay attention to him, because they know he would lay down his life in order to save them. So he said, that's a very good explanation you've given. Can I use it in my manual when I'm teaching? I says, permission granted. So now it's in the manual. and the trip to West Point was very special, because they took us all through the academy. They asked me, what is it that you would like to see? And I said, I want to see where General MacArthur made his last speech, old soldiers never die. And they took me to the cafeteria where the speech took place, and it was very moving to see that. And when we got to the outside, they took us on a tour all through the campus. And the following day, they were handing out the Thayer Award to the Madeleine Albright. And I love a military parade. I said, that I would like to see. That night, the protocol officer called. My son answered the phone. He wanted to know if we had coats and ties. And of course, we said, no, we got sweatshirts and all that. He says, well, we want to put you in the VIP section, where all the retired generals and all the important people stand. But I told him, I said, I just want to see the parade. I don't have to be in the VIP section. Nevertheless, when we were escorted to the stadium the following day, we had some cadets escort us to our seats. One of the cadets was an Hispanic from Lincoln High School in Los Angeles. And I told him, just seeing you guys, I feel safe. I know that nothing's going to happen to our country. But when we got the seats, we were in the most exclusive seats of the whole stadium. We were right on the rail. We had the first vision of everything, and we watched the military parade. We saw the brigades pass by in review, and when it was over, the protocol officer comes to me and said, it's time for you to meet the director. So I left my seat. We went to meet the director, and he said, I know your story. Tell it to her. That was Madeleine Albright. And I said, fine. So I told her the story. She was such a gracious lady. She listened attentively. When she ended, she gave me a big hug and a kiss, and everything went fine. After the parade, we left, and we headed for New Jersey, where we were, and we went on to our next thing. However, I feel that the visit to West Point was very educational for me, because these group of young men that are training there, our country will be safe for many years to come. Now, getting back to the surrender of Corregidor, I was part of the last 26 kilometers of the Death March. And that was very, very strenuous. And it was a time when most of them were all fatigued out. And as they fell, they would shoot them or bayonet them. And those of us who made it were lucky to make it to the camp at Cabanatuan. Now, that was an awful camp. When you take into consideration that when we first got there, we were losing 50 to 150 men a day, all from dysentery, malaria, and plain malnutrition. And to see all those people dying and just throwing them in a big hole and use it as a grave was really something that was very demoralizing. But I was lucky here recently to be invited to Japan with my son David to go on what they call a friendship tour. And this was something the Japanese government put up to try to make amends with the prisoners of war. And everything was first class. The airplane, the hotels, the food, and everything. And I was named the leader of this particular group. I don't know why, but every time we'd get to a new venue, I had to make a speech. I spoke at the Diet, which is the seat of the government for Japan, and I met some very heavy politicians. We had two of them that are going to become premiers of Japan in the future. Now, one of them was a real sharp politician. In fact, he had just returned from Cairo, Egypt, representing Japan in the Mideast to make sure that everything was in order. And he was a very important gentleman. I didn't know who he was, but since the cameras were on us at all times, even when we walked arm in arm to the exit, I said, this fellow must be somebody. I finally found out, yes, he's going to be groomed to be the premier. He became good friends with me, and he said, I'm coming to Washington sometime in the spring, and on my way back, I'm going to stop in Los Angeles just to have dinner with you. And I felt, wow, this is something special. The future premier of Japan is going to stop to have dinner with me. So I'm expecting that to be a great occasion. Now, people always mention Campo Mori. Campo Mori was important to me because I was in the first group of prisoners that got to Japan. And a trip that takes 5 days took us 33 days. And the reason, every time we'd get to the Formosa Straits, the American submarines would torpedo our convoy, and you would see people drowning all over the place because no one would pick them up. In one of the last trips, we were fortunate that the torpedo that was meant for the Totori Maru, the ship I was on, fizzled before it hit the bow. Otherwise, I wouldn't be standing here today. But I was fortunate enough to make it to Japan, and being in the first group, they really didn't have a place to house us. They put us in a warehouse. We arrived at Shinagawa Station, and there was a big crowd there. Evidently, they had advertised that the prisoners of war from the Philippines were coming, and when we got off, they took us to the courtyard, and a Japanese got up and made a speech, the interpreter told me that, in effect, he was talking about this is the remnants of the military service for the Americans in the Philippines. The Philippines are now part of the Japanese conquest, and they are part of the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere. So we all got it done, and I said, wow. They marched us close by to a warehouse district, and before we got into the complex, the camp commander, who spoke fluent English, got on his soapbox, and the first thing he said was, "It is only through the courtesy of the emperor that you are allowed to live." Well, I said, welcome home. And during his speech, I noticed that there were some other prisoners of war in the complex already. And I said, I wonder where they're from, since we are the first ones to come from the Philippines. And when we got in, they were British prisoners of war from the Singapore, Hong Kong, and some military personnel from the Repulse and the Prince of Wales, which the Japanese sunk in the Indian Ocean. The British were wonderful. They accepted us with open arms, and I can say that because of the British, I am here today. They taught me how to survive. Now, Camp Omori is close to me because the American troops, together with the British, they helped to reclaim the land so that they could build more barracks to bring in more prisoners for slave labor. And I still don't understand the process of land reclaiming, but they dredged the water, the sand came down, we used to spread it throughout the island. We built a big enough of an island so that we could build barracks to bring more prisoners for their slave labor. And I worked as a stevedore in the Japanese railways and the docks, which was hard work, but it was good work because on the railroad we'd get to steal rice, wheat, soybeans, whatever we could, just to add to our diet. And people are not aware that Japan had the biggest air attack in the history of aerial warfare. On one night alone, March the 9th, 1945, for the first time they used incendiary bombs. And that night they killed more than 86,000 civilians. They destroyed 1/4 of the city of Tokyo, and they left over 1 million people homeless. So Japan was really beaten when the air started to hit them. Then we waited, and fortunately, the commander of the camp had come to us and told us, since the Japanese had lost the islands of Okinawa and all, that when American troops would land in Tokyo, they were going to take us to a mine, seal it, and blow it up. So people always ask me about the atom bomb. And I said, to me it was a blessing, because otherwise I wouldn't be here today. So once the atom bomb came along, we did everything in a cordial manner. We were returned home, and thank God we were able all to make it. Now, the people always ask me about Louis Zamperini. Zamperini and I were in camp together at Omori, and we became close friends because he was a great fan of the athletics and the USC, and I knew all about USC, so we spent the time talking about it, and it helped pass the time. One time I was doing my laundry and Louis came by and he said, "You know, Sanchez, I wish I were back home in Torrance. I would be having a malted milk at my uncle's drugstore." And boy, and I said, "Louis, you keep thinking that way and you're going to make it." So Louis and I were close friends because after we were discharged, he and I were going into business together. And I rented an office space at the Park Central building in 412 West 6th Street, overlooking Pershing Square. And one day, Louis came to me and he said that he had had a meeting with the evangelist, Billy Graham, and he said he invited me to go on a tour with him, and I accepted. I said, "Louis, you go ahead. You have my blessing. You need all the help you can get." At that time, Louis had a big drinking problem, and of course, he had very severe post-traumatic stress. He would wake up in the middle of the night, choking his wife, thinking he had the Wiley Bird, which was our disciplinary officer in Omori, and who especially made things very difficult for Louis. And he, in effect, hated Americans. The British he didn't do, or the Dutch, that none of the prisoners he would treat as bad as he did the Americans. I know that on one occasion, I was crossing the courtyard at the camp, and I heard the word Kiotski, which means attention. And I stood at attention, and he came, he slapped me, he beat me with his kendo stick, kicked me and everything. When I got up, I said, "Sir, what did I do wrong so that I don't do it again?" He said, "You looked at me cunningly." Now, as far as I know, I didn't even look at him. But what can you do with a man like that? When Louis and I would meet at the VA, when we would go there for our visits for the different health issues, he told me, we used to talk, I'd say, "Well, let's go 15, 20 minutes in the lobby." It never lasted less than 2 hours. He used to tell me he was going skiing and all. I said, "Louis, you're nuts. You're going to hit a tree, that frail body of yours is going to disintegrate. There'll be no more Louis." And he said, "Well, I'll do it a couple more times and quit." But he told me that he had gone to Japan and he wanted to make amends and forgive the Wiley Bird, Watanabe. When he got to this home, his son answered the phone, and he said, "My dad does not want to talk about the war anymore. That's in the past and everything." So Louis didn't get to forgive him. And I told him, "Louis, I'm glad you didn't forgive him. That SOB, I would never forgive him for all the misery he caused us." So that was all part of our conversation. And I don't know, how many of you have seen the movie Unbroken? Hey, well, that will give you an idea of the way the POWs were treated by the Japanese Imperial Army. At the VA, we have a group that's made up of POWs, both Europe and the Far East. We started with 57 men. Today, there are only 6 of us left. So we've been hit very seriously by death and losing our members. But we all try to carry on and do the best we can. And I'm so glad that I got to come here to speak to you, gentlemen, because you are a special group. Thank you.